Reading the Times for Friday, January 3rd, 2020. Reading the Times for Friday, January 3rd, 2020. U.S. strikes in Iraq kills Qasem Soleimani, commander of Iranian forces. The highly classified mission was set in motion after the American contractor's death on December 27th during a rocket attack by an Iranian-backed militia, a senior American official said. Speaking to reporters while on vacation at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Palm Beach, Florida on Tuesday night, hours after an assault on the American embassy in Baghdad that the United States officials said was orchestrated by Iran, Mr. Trump, who has repeatedly vowed to end American entanglements in the Middle East, insisted that he did not want war. American military officials said they were aware of a potentially violent response from Iran and its proxies, and were taking steps they declined to specify to protect American personnel in the Middle East and elsewhere around the world. It's going to be a blast furnace. Australia fires intensify. The Chules will return for more people, officials said, but it will be a slow process. The trip to a safe port in the sprawling country is expected to take 17 hours. The state premier of Victoria, Daniel Andrews, said 17 people were still missing as fires swept alpine resorts and the normally bucolic Gippsland area. With lodgings full, many people fleeing the fires have been forced to sleep in their cars. Cash-rich Democrats brace for long fight as Trump hoards money. The scope of Mr. Bloomberg's spending is staggering. He has reserved more in TV ads, $37 million, in the first days of January than the fundraising leader, Mr. Sanders, has collected in the final 3 months from more than 1.8 million contributions. Mr. Buttigieg's campaign outraised Mr. Biden's for the third consecutive quarter, and it raised roughly $76 million in 2019, compared to about $60 million for Mr. Biden. Her campaign emailed supporters in late December to say her pace was behind her third quarter haul by millions of dollars and set a reduced goal of $20 million. With partial flavor ban, Trump splits the difference on vaping. The administration's decision to largely spare vape shops from the flavor ban reflects an intense lobbying campaign by the vaping industry. The current debate over a flavor ban was set off by youth vaping and the recent outbreak of severe lung injuries, largely related to vaping THC, the high-inducing ingredient in marijuana. Amanda Wheeler, a vape shop owner in Prescott, Arizona, who started the We Vape, We Vote campaign in Arizona and Colorado, said she was amazed that the efforts against a full ban had worked. Carlos Ghosn flirted with Hollywood, then delivered a plot twist. As proceedings dragged on, Mr. Ghosn studied the cases of prominent defendants who had fought Japan's justice system. Mr. Ghosn's lead lawyer on the case, Junichiro Hironaka, and his team spent months condemning Japan's system of hostage justice as part of a public relations strategy aimed at questioning whether it was possible for Mr. Ghosn to get a fair trial in the country. Soon after Mr. Ghosn's 2018 arrest, Shin Kukimoto, the deputy head of Tokyo prosecutor's office, defended the way Mr. Ghosn had been treated. It looks like health insurance, but it's not. It's just try God, buyers are told. It looks like health insurance, but it's not. Just trust God, buyers are told. Just Trust God, the nonprofit group Samaritan Ministries in Peoria, Illinois, said in a statement about its coverage, and advises its members that there is no coverage, no guarantee of payment. More than 1 million Americans struggling to cope with rising cost of health insurance have joined such groups, attracted by prices that are far lower than premiums for policies that must meet strict requirements, like guaranteed coverage for pre-existing conditions established by the Affordable Care Act. The Texas Attorney General brought a lawsuit last summer against Alira Healthcare, which marketed Trinity Ministries' program, to stop it from offering unregulated insurance products to the public. The Houston Chronicle featured one couple who was left with more than $100,000 in unpaid medical bills. In a statement, Alira said it's deeply disappointing to see state regulators working to deny their residents access to more affordable alternatives offered by health care sharing ministries. Trinity says its website makes clear that the ministry does not offer health insurance. Qasem Soleimani, master of Iran's intrigue, built a Shiite axis of power in Middle East. In Mr. Petraeus' telling of the story, he was shown a text message directed to him, "General Petraeus, you should know that I, Qasem Soleimani, control the policy for Iran with respect to Iraq, Lebanon, Gaza, and Afghanistan." Years later, General Soleimani personally and mockingly addressed another American leader, President Trump, who in July 2018 warned Iran's president not to threaten the United States. Then he got up and approached me and kissed me on my forehead. That same trove of documents contains evidence that General Soleimani is not universally admired within Iran. Iran's expansionist policies in Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon have been contentious at home among ordinary Iranians and some reformist politicians who saw money and resources diverted from Iran to fund General Soleimani's missions. Turkey, flexing its muscles, will send troops to Libya. Coming just months after Turkey's third military incursion into Syria, it expands Turkey's military footprint in a volatile region and, analysts say, offers new evidence of its growing self-confidence in a regional power. According the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, an independent monitoring organization, Turkey has already sent Syrian proxy fighters to Libya, and more have assembled in training camps in Turkey ahead of deployment. President Trump spoke with Mr. Erdogan on Thursday, the White House said, and pointed out that foreign interference is complicating the situation in Libya. The White House did not say whether Mr. Trump had asked Turkey to refrain from sending troops. As India's violence gets worse, police are accused of abusing Muslims. In one case, officers smacked a 72-year-old Muslim man with a rifle butt, telling him Muslims have only two places, Pakistan or the graveyard. Harsh Mandir, a human rights activist who formerly worked in India's civil service, said he visited homes resembling wastelands where the police had destroyed kitchens, smashed television sets, and threatened to seize property. In an audio recording that some residents and officials say features the voice of Sanjeev Tyagi, the superintendent of police in the Binor district, which includes Najina, a man orders police officers to break the arms and legs of those throwing stones at police stations. "Go and fix them," he said. Mr. Adityanath had called Muslims a crop of two-legged animals that had to be stopped. During his tenure as chief minister, the state police have killed dozens of suspects in altercations known in India as police encounters. On the afternoon of December 20th, as Friday prayer ended and people began to hit the streets across Uttar Pradesh to protest the citizenship bill, violence exploded in several towns at the same time. India cold wave breaks records, shuts schools, and makes bad air worse. India's capital, New Delhi, experienced its coldest day in December in 119 years on Monday, with the maximum temperature dipping below 49 degrees Fahrenheit, about 20 degrees below the average for December. Ramesh Gupta, a shopkeeper in New Delhi, who works at one of India's biggest electrical wholesaler markets, said that most branded heating appliances had sold out and that prices for basic heaters had doubled in the last week, to about 19 from 10. Vivek Sharma, who sells woolen clothing in South Delhi, said he kept shuttling between his small shop and the warehouses where he replenishes his inventory. Outside the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, a large hospital in New Delhi that offers free treatment to the country's poorest, hundreds of patients sprawled out on sidewalks, covering themselves with quilts for a night in the cold. Flash floods in Indonesia leave hundreds of thousands homeless. On Tuesday, parts of the city recorded more than a foot of rain, according to the country's meteorology, climatology, and geophysics agency. More than 100 rescue workers from the country's emergency relief agency and several military units had been deployed in the capital, Budi Purnama. The operations director of National Search and Rescue Agency said on Thursday. The rain falling on New Year's Eve in the western and northern parts of Java was very extreme, the meteorology agency said in a statement, referring to the Java island, Indonesia's most populous. Taiwan's top military official and 7 others die in a helicopter crash. 8 people, including the chief of Taiwan's armed forces, were killed Thursday after the military helicopter carrying them crashed on a mountainside during a routine trip, Taiwan's military said. Tsai Ing-wen, Taiwan's president, called it a sad day, with several excellent military leaders and colleagues killed in an accident in the line of duty. She wrote on Facebook that General Shen was an excellent and well-qualified chief who was beloved by all. Taiwan is in the final stretch of its presidential race, with Ms. Tsai holding a lead over Han Kuo-yu, the candidate from the main opposition party, the Kuomintang. The United States sells military equipment for Taiwan's defense, including Black Hawk helicopters. Video showing sexual assault by mob in Egypt draws outrage. For years, Egyptians have tried to draw attention to the routine sexual harassment and assault of women. Many men and women are stating that her outfit was inappropriate and could have well provoked the men. A 2017 survey by 2 groups that promote gender equality, Promundo and UN Woman, found that sexual harassment is rampant on Egyptian streets, particularly in urban areas. In a 2013 study by UN Women, 99.3% of Egyptian women and girls in a survey said they had been victims of some kind of sexual harassment, from unwanted advances to rape. U.S. strike on Iranian general divides Congress. The killing of the powerful commander of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, Major General Qasem Soleimani, in a drone strike on Friday, sharply divided congressional leaders along party lines and reignited a debate over whether Congress should curtail the president's war powers. The coming hours and days will be very important. According to Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the strike was carried out without the consultation of Congress. American leaders' highest priority is to protect American lives and interests, Ms. Pelosi said in a statement. Representative Ro Khanna, Democrat of California, said by failing to pass a measure to require authorization to strike Iran, our Congress let our nation down again by failing to stand up against a war in Iran. Any members who voted for the N.D.A.A, a blank check, can't now express dismay that Trump may have launched another war in the Middle East, said Representative Ro Khanna, Democrat of California, and one of the sponsors of the measure. A Sir with blue-collar roots. Britain's Labour race has an unlikely leader. After Britain's Labour Party suffered its worst defeat since 1935 and last month's election, a chorus of critics faulted the party for losing touch with its working-class roots in the industrial north and becoming too closely identified with the left wing, London-centered politics of its leader, Jeremy Corbyn, who voted to remain in the European Union in 2016, also pushed his own party, which had been bitterly split over Brexit, to be open to a second referendum, something he now acknowledges will never happen in the wake of Mr. Johnson's winning campaign to get Brexit done. The Labour Party kept Mr. Starmer under wraps during the campaign, in part because of his heavy identification with the Brexit debate, which the party's leaders did not want to highlight in this election. The case for a bold and radical Labour government is as strong now as it was Thursday. But Mr. Starmer criticized the party's failure to confront allegations of deep-rooted anti-Semitism in the party, which dogged Mr. Corbyn during the campaign, particularly when he declined to apologize for it. Israeli Supreme Court removes an obstacle for Netanyahu. With Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu under indictment, Israel's Supreme Court on Thursday refused to weigh in on whether a prime minister candidate charged with serious crimes can be asked to form a new government. A ruling against Mr. Netanyahu on Thursday could have been seen as interfering in the election campaign, and judges are under pressure from conservative forces in the government that want to curb the judiciary's influence. Benny Gantz, the leader of the centrist Blue and White Party and Mr. Netanyahu's chief opponent, described the court's decision as appropriate, adding, "Netanyahu will be tried by the people at the polls, and we will win." The last two elections in April and September ended inconclusively with neither Likud nor Blue and White able to muster the majority needed to form a viable government. Denying a professor tenure, Harvard sparks a debate over ethnic studies. At the very moment that Harvard is defending its use of race in admissions, citing diversity as a key component of the education it provides, students of color are saying that once they are on campus, Harvard devalues their history and experiences and fails to retain professors who support them. While we understand that receiving tenure at Harvard is never assured, they wrote, questions about the fairness of the promotion process for faculty in fields long misunderstood and dismissed at the university will inevitably arise until they are afforded the respect and resources given to other areas of study. The tenure process at Harvard is shrouded in secrecy. In October, several students of color in one of her classes were questioned by Harvard University police officers when they were putting up an art project in the Harvard Yard, an activity for which Dr. Garcia Pena had received permission. Storm of tumbleweeds buries cars, terrifies drivers, and astounds police. Along a long stretch of road in Washington state, the tumbleweeds took over instead, more like monsters out of a science fiction than lonely icons of the American West. The reality is the region which close to the Columbia River and has a desert climate is known for tumbleweeds and whipping dust, said David Mosley, a spokesman for the state's Department of Transportation. In Washington, Mr. Thorson said the problem began after the tumbleweeds rolled down the 40-foot berms along the highway and onto the road. Soon there were so many that drivers had a difficult time seeing the highway and pulled over. Man captured on doorbell camera footage confessing to a murder. The woman, Jennifer Chioma Ebichi, 32, had been stabbed at least a dozen times when the authorities found her on the kitchen floor at the home in Pflugerville, according to documents provided by the Travis County District Clerk's Office. The trade-off is one that is hard, but also one I'm not sure citizens have fully understood when they decided to buy a little extra security for their home. One of the best-known doorbell camera brands is Ring, which makes a doorbell that doubles as a security camera and was acquired by Amazon in 2018. Ring objects to overbroad or otherwise inappropriate legal demands as a matter of course. It was unclear whether a Ring camera was involved in the Pflugerville case. Other popular home security camera brands include Wyze and Nest. Biden warns about disinformation after misleading video. You're going to see a lot more of not only my statements being taken out of context and lied about or altered, you're going to see whomever the Democratic nominee is, because that's how this guy operates, Mr. Biden said, adding that Democratic candidates would face unfair attacks from Mr. Trump. If I were to drop out of the race tomorrow, or if I were to drop dead tomorrow, Mr. Biden's comment came in response to an event attendee who asked him about his ability to beat Mr. Trump, and also to clarify his remarks in the video, which had been misleadingly edited to wrongly suggest that Mr. Biden was making racist remarks. In response to the questioner, who also asked whether he was running a better campaign than Hillary Clinton had, Mr. Biden offered a wide-ranging answer and relitigated how Mrs. Clinton handled the debate after Mr. Trump was caught on tape bragging about making unsolicited sexual advances. At a campaign office opening in Plymouth, New Hampshire, the entrepreneur Andrew Yang told voters, "Donald Trump is our president today because he had a very simple message. He said he was going to make America great again." What did Hillary Clinton say in response? America is already great. Senator Elizabeth Warren spoke at a campaign event in Concord, New Hampshire. What is it? The entrepreneur Andrew Yang told voters, "Donald Trump is our president today because he had a very simple message. He said he was going to make America great again." What did Hillary Clinton say in response? "America is already great," Mr. Yang said. Julian Castro ends presidential run. It simply isn't our time. Julian Castro, the former housing secretary, who was the only Latino candidate in the Democratic primary, said Thursday he would end his bid for the presidency, capping a year-long campaign where he struggled in polls but remained a policy pacesetter on immigration and fighting poverty. Though Mr. Castro denied his remark had been meant as a shot at Mr. Biden, he was assailed by some strategists and lost the endorsement of a Texas congressman, who backed Mr. Biden instead. Mr. Castro gained attention again in recent weeks with his call for a reordering of the Democratic primary schedule, arguing that Iowa and New Hampshire, whose largely white population vote first, did not represent the demographics of the country. Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, speaking to reporters after a campaign event in Concord, New Hampshire, praised Mr. Castro as a firm, clear, moral voice in the primary, and said she was very sorry to hear he was leaving. More than 200 Republicans urged Supreme Court to weigh overturning Roe v. Wade. More than 200 Republican members of Congress on Thursday asked the Supreme Court to consider overturning Roe v. Wade, the landmark 1973 ruling that established a woman's right to an abortion, in a brief urging the justices to uphold a Louisiana law that severely restricts access to the procedure. President Trump ran and won in 2016, partly on a promise to nominate Supreme Court justices who would overturn Roe, and June Medical is the court's first case on abortion since Justices Neil M. Gorsuch and Brett M. Kavanaugh, both appointed by Mr. Trump, joined the court. Amici respectfully suggests that the court's struggle, similar to dozens of other courts' Herculean struggles in this area, illustrates the unworkability of the right to abortion found in Roe, they wrote, and the need for the court to take up the issue of whether Roe and Casey should be reconsidered and, if appropriate, overruled. Texas judge rules that hospital can take baby off life support. A Texas judge ruled on Thursday that a hospital's plan to remove an 11-month-old girl from life support over her family's objections could proceed, the latest twist in a case that has drawn notice from conservatives around the state. Joseph M. Nixon, a lawyer for Ms. Lewis, said that he had filed a notice of appeal and will file a motion for emergency relief on Thursday afternoon, effectively stopping the hospital from removing Tinsley from life support. In November, the state's Attorney General, Ken Paxton, filed a friend of the court brief in support of Ms. Lewis's case, arguing that letting the hospital withdraw life support would violate the constitutional right to life. 100 years ago, the booziest January suddenly dried up. Prohibition was a small-town, rural movement, and people in cities resented it. They really thought until the very end that there was going to be a way out of it, and then suddenly it became clear there wasn't. Tanks being used to destroy stills and other moonshine equipment in Newport, Kentucky. Hold up a sec. The military equipment was used to crush the contraband articles into fragments. Photo credit we have to erase. Right. In October 1919, over President Woodrow Wilson's veto, Congress passed the National Prohibition Act, more commonly known as the Volstead Act, for its mustachioed champion, Representative Andrew Volstead of Minnesota, to provide for the enforcement of the 18th Amendment. On every face was stamped that extraordinary and inexplicable expression of triumph mingled with apprehension, which the possession of an irreplaceable treasure in a predicament of extraordinary peril is wont to imbue. It was impossible to buy enough liquor to last a lifetime, but people tried, said Daniel Okrent, the author of Last Call, The Rise and Fall of Prohibition. In Hollywood, he said, Mary Pickford's mom bought the contents of an entire liquor store. What businesses couldn't sell off in bulk, they splashed out at parties, beginning with a particularly raucous New Year's Eve and continuing right up until the last midnight, 16 days later. Christianity Today editor laments ethical naivety of Trump backers. In an interview with the New York Times on Thursday, he said he was shocked by the magnitude of the reaction to the editorial, but also by evangelicals' willingness to stick by Trump for more than 3 years. Is there anything Trump could do to lose that support? I've been surprised by the ethical naivety of the response I'm receiving to the editorial. Do you think evangelicals' willingness to excuse Trump's behavior will translate to a more broad willingness to forgive bad behavior by politicians? Or does it seem to be Trump-specific? I think his supporters would say it is limited to Trump. It's an old and insidious hatred, and New Yorkers can't stand for it. Of 421 hate crimes reported in New York City in 2019, more than half were directed at Jews, according to police crime data. In New York, Mayor de Blasio over the weekend said that the city would increase police presence in heavily Jewish areas. In New York, a city of immigrants and refugees, anti-Semitism is a threat to everyone. Apocalypse becomes a new normal. In recent years, climate scientists have tried to cut through the confusion by engaging in extreme event attribution, which focuses on probabilities. You can't necessarily say that climate change caused a particular heat wave, but you can ask how much a difference global warming made to the probability of that heat wave happening. The answer typically is a lot. Climate change makes the kind of extreme weather events we've been seeing much more likely. Not long ago, it was all too common to read articles about heat waves, floods, and droughts that seemed to go to great lengths to avoid mentioning climate change. A ridiculously optimistic history of the next decade. Looking back at the 2020s from our vantage point in 2030, The first great event was the complete destruction of Donald Trump's Republican Party. As the former Republican consultant Mike Murphy had noticed, there were roughly 300 states and federal elections during the Trump years, and Republicans did horribly in most of them. Trump's landslide defeat left him humiliated, and the Republicans lost their Senate majority. Why are you publicly sharing your child's DNA information? Along with finding out that both her children had a mutation of the MTHFR gene, she also received 23andMe's analysis of her children's genetic susceptibility to a number of adult-onset diseases, including Parkinson's. Miss Evans is not alone in testing her children's DNA. While 23andMe does not track how many of its kits have been used to test children, there's a growing interest in genotyping children. While we have laws to protect children from third parties sharing children's personal information online, these laws don't apply when a parent does the sharing or consents to allowing someone else to do it. Why is America so depressed? Even as our mental health crisis proliferates, even as streams of books and articles are published about depression and anxiety, the subject of mental illness has become another voyeuristic exhibition in the carnival of commerce. We need a national leader who will, as President Carter tried to do, address the urgent issue of mental illness, not with piecemeal legislation, but with a national crusade. In the absence of a national resolve to address surging mental illness in America, our politics and its social consequences will continue to toss on waves of depression, anxiety, and despair, themselves both a cause and an effect of our collapsing public realm. Compassion, not patriarchy, at AA meetings. For anyone who has attended more than a handful of AA meetings, Ms. Whitaker's opinion that the organization is patriarchal makes little sense. Walking into my first AA meeting was the single bravest thing I have ever done. There are also men-only meetings, gay-only meetings, Spanish-speaking meetings, meetings at 5 a.m., noon and midnight, meetings where everyone has a graduate degree, and meetings with junkies nodding off in the corner, meetings with nobody over 20, and meetings with no one under 65. Joe Biden, demand that you testify. It is a positive sign that Joe Biden has stated he would comply with a subpoena issued in any impeachment trial in the Senate, but he should take a further step. He should demand that he be called to testify. The House Republicans continually complain that Mr. Biden was not called to testify. Here's the opportunity for him to be heard. Mr. Biden's testimony would serve two purposes. He could use the process to clear his name of the false allegations that have been levied against him, and it would show the country that, unlike the Republicans who refused to call the witnesses that Senator Chuck Schumer has named, the Democrats have nothing to hide. It is time to expose Senator Mitch McConnell for the manipulative politician that he is. Mr. Biden can do just that. Sonny Mehta was my first editor. We sat in his New York City apartment for 2 days going through the manuscript of my first novel, The Flamingo Rising. Line by line, almost word by word, I learned more about writing process in those 2 days than I had before or since. At one point, after we had quibbled with one another over one of his suggestions, I got exacerbated. Sonny, with all these problems, why did you even buy the book? He took a puff of his cigarette and said, because I saw a wonderful story with a lot of sloppy writing getting in the way. Okay, I think that's two editorials in one there. This union defeated Airbnb. Now it's taking aim at a new target. With a potent mixture of campaign cash, canny bets on local races, and union members ready to take to the streets, Mr. Ward has transformed his union of 33,600 hotel workers into one of the most imposing political forces in New York. The targets of the union's activism are chosen strategically, either because they further one of the union's narrow interests, special hotel permits, casino expansion, or demonstrate its political organizing strength. In New York City, the union used $400,000 from its Independent Expenditure Committee to boost a slate of city council candidates in 2017. That slate then backed the union's choice for Speaker, Mr. Johnson, a Manhattan councilman and longtime ally of the union. Tessa Majors murder. 13-year-old suspect must remain in custody. A family court judge on Thursday rejected a request from a lawyer for the 13-year-old charged in the killing of the Bernard College student Tessa Majors that the teenager be allowed to go home until his trial begins. The teenager told investigators that one of his 14-year-old friends had stabbed Miss Majors during a struggle. The detectives testified. One of the other two teenagers provided a forensic sample to the police after a different Manhattan judge signed a search warrant, the police said. "Don't drink and drive," Republican leader said. Then he was arrested. Last month, the top Republican in the New York State Assembly, Brian M. Kolb, published a guest column in a local newspaper warning against the dangers of drunken driving, especially during the holidays, noting that tragedy can only be one bad decision away. Mr. Kolb, 67, personally proved his point days later when he was arrested and charged with drinking and driving on New Year's Eve. One of Mr. Kolb's Republican colleagues in the Assembly, Kieran Michael Layler, had used Twitter to call for Mr. Kolb to step down as a minority leader. Mr. Kolb's December 24th column in the Upstate Daily Messenger newspaper warned against drunk driving during the holidays, and it's highlighted that December was National Drunk and Drugged Driving Prevention Month. Suspect in anti-Semitic rampage in Muncie is eyed in earlier attacks. Chief Brad Weedle of the Ramapo Police Department, which is overseeing both investigations, said that detectives were looking at possible links between the two attacks, but that the man, Grafton E. Thomas, was not yet a suspect in the November one. Within days of the chilling stabbing in November, when an Orthodox Jewish man was attacked as he walked to his synagogue, officers had interviewed Mr. Thomas, according to Chief Weedle. On a conference call with reporters, Mr. Thomas's lawyer, Michael Sussman, said that he had not investigated whether Mr. Thomas was connected to the November attack and could not comment on it. At SoftBank's Jewel in India, toxic culture and troubling incidents. At least part of Oyo's rise in India was built on practices that raised questions about the health of its business, according to financial filings, court documents, and interviews with 20 current and former employees, as well as others familiar with the startup's operations. Oyo has also imposed extra fees on hotels and declined to pay the hotels the full amount they claimed they were owed, according to interviews with hotel owners and employees, emails, legal complaints, and other documents viewed by the Times. Mr. Ghosh, who left the India job this week and joined Oyo's board, said that some hotels open in stages, and that there is no padding. Saurabh Sharma, who worked for Oyo from 2014 to 2018 as an operation manager, said the company sometimes deliberately withheld payments from hotel owners, a practice that half a dozen other current and former employees also described. Electric cars threaten the heart of Germany's economy. Global car sales are declining at the same time that companies are pouring billions of dollars into new technologies like autonomous driving and electric cars, which are easier to assemble and require fewer workers and fewer parts. Mr. Brezian said job losses from upheaval in the car industry were bigger than they seemed, with companies quietly letting go of workers on temporary contracts. German car companies typically build their own motors, but almost all of Europe's battery cells, which account for a large share of an electric car's costs, are imported from Asia. Apple deal returns former HBO boss Richard Plepler to spotlight. In the 10 months since Richard Plepler stepped down as HBO's chief executive, The final season of Game of Thrones came and went. CBS and Viacom merged, and Disney and Apple rolled out new streaming services. On a mirror is a taped sign of Ted Williams, quote, that he has carted to nearly every office he has inhabited. On a mirror is a taped sign of a Ted Williams quote that he has carted to nearly every office he has inhabited in his long career. Don't ever let anyone monkey with your swing. Mr. Q contacted Mr. Plepler soon after his abrupt departure from HBO. As you can imagine, in the days and the first couple weeks after I left, I received an enormous amount of well-wishing calls. And Eddie was among those people, Mr. Plepler said. We have a long-standing mutual admiration with Richard, and we're looking forward to helping him build a dynamic production company and seeing him thrive with us at Apple. One topic Mr. Plepler did not want to discuss in detail, his exit from HBO. New people came in and bought the company, he said. Dealing with bias in artificial intelligence. If your machine learning algorithm is one that is trained on the data from a given set of hospitals, and you will only use it in those same set of hospitals, then latching onto which hospital did the scan could be well a reasonable approach. Overall, there's not nearly as much sophistication as there needs to be out there for the level of rigor that we need in terms of the application of data science to real-world data, and especially biomedical data. We need to have principles and standards and governing bodies and people voting on things and algorithms being checked, something similar to the FDA. So for me, it's not as simple as creating a more diverse data set and things are fixed. Mustang from famed bullet car chase heads to auction. The expert Kevin Marty said he gasped when he saw it. Oh my God, it's real. He said he had been called multiple times over the years to investigate another bullet lookalikes. Someone found the second Mustang in a junkyard in Mexico a few years ago. While still valuable, Mr. Marty noted, it does not have the same provenance or cachet as Mr. Kiernan's hero car. Cars from America's so-called muscle car era are right in Meckham's wheelhouse. Mr. Kiernan's decision to offer the car in a no-reserve sale is highly unusual. Historically significant cars typically might be offered with a reserve or a minimum price the seller might accept. And that has been Reading the Times for Friday, January 3rd. That has been Reading the Times for Friday, January 3rd, 2020.